Alright, what's going on guys? In this video, I'm going to show you how to upgrade the Liliana the Necromancer Planeswalker deck. As always, do keep in mind that these are not intended to be tier 1 competitive decks. If you want that, consider checking out the latest tournament results. Also keep in mind that those decks are very expensive. What we'll be doing is upgrading this deck card by card, sticking to this deck's themes and doing it on a budget as we will not exceed $15 USD with our upgrades. I know the currency isn't relevant to everyone, I apologize for that, but just know that $15 USD is the MSRP of the average Planeswalker deck, so that's roughly how much we're spending. So, the Liliana the Necromancer Planeswalker deck doesn't really have any specific strategy exactly. I mean, it's kind of a Graveyard Matters theme with things like Demon of Catastrophes and Reassembling Skeleton with, Gravedigger 2, but it's a pretty loose connection. I mean, basically, the Demon of Catastrophes forces you to sacrifice a creature, and if you sacrifice the skeleton, then you can just recast it, so you negate the drawback, and then Gravedigger would also allow you to get your creature back, so that's kind of the idea. It's kind of a Graveyard Matters recursion type of deck. It's there, but it's not very, there, if that makes sense. Anyway, the exclusive cards that come with the deck, the cards you can only get by purchasing it, are Liliana herself, along with Liliana's Spoils and Arisen Gorgon. And as usual, the deck is filled with plenty of really bad cards. I'm looking at you, Walking Corpse and Strangling Spores. Oh man, Walking Corpse is a grizzly bear? I mean, for crying out loud, it's a grizzly bear, it's horrible. And Strangling Spores is one of the most overpriced and underpowered removal spells ever. 4 mana and you can only kill something with 3 toughness or less. This is not good, very not good, not good at all. So we're going to be taking these cards out and replacing them with things that don't completely suck. Yep, that's what we're doing. Let's get started. So first off, let's take out 2 Walking Corpses for 2 Knights of Malice. Alright, so Walking Corpses cost 2 mana and they're 2/2s with no abilities. Knight of Malice, also a 2 mana 2/2, but it has First Strike, Hexproof from white, and it becomes a 3/2 if we're playing against a white deck. Do I need to justify myself at all here? Literally the entire text box on the Knight is just strictly better than the zombie, which is completely devoid of anything relevant in an actual game. So yeah, this is a clear improvement, no doubt. It's not like a debatable thing. Walking Corpses are terrible. Next, we're going to take out the Skeleton Archer and replace it with a Dredge Shade. So these are both 3/3s, but the Skeleton Archer costs 1 extra mana, and for that 1 extra mana we have to spend to cast it. We get 1 point of damage, which isn't a lot. The Shade, on the other hand, has a pump ability, which lets us dump all of our mana into it to make a massive creature. So the Dredge Shade is both faster than the Skeleton and better in the late game when we have lots of extra mana sitting around. I'm willing to sacrifice a single point of damage for that much power, for sure. Also, it's just faster, so that's nice. Next, we'll take out 2 Skymarch Bloodletters for 2 more Dredge Shades. The Bloodletters are, they're alright. I've played them on Magic Arena a little bit. It's a 3 mana 2/2 flyer, it drains the opponent for 1. It's okay, but it's nothing compared to a Dredge Shade, which can simply end games by itself. Dredge Shades always make combat difficult for the opponent too. It's just really complicated when your opponent has a few creatures and one of them can pump itself up, so you never know how they're going to align their blockers and how they're going to pump up the Dredge Shade. It makes combat math much more difficult for the opponent, and hey, that works in your favor, so take advantage of it. Next, we're going to take out a Meteor Golem for a Demon of Catastrophes. Yeah, I hate these golems, I hate them. It's a 7 mana 3/3, and yeah, it does get to blow something up, but it's just so expensive. The demon gives us a massive flying threat, and while we do have to sacrifice a creature to cast it, it just puts out so much damage so fast that it's almost always going to be worth it. Also, a quick tip, if your opponent has no blockers, be sure to attack first with the creature that you're planning to sacrifice, and then cast the demon in the second main phase. You might as well get that extra damage in with that creature before you sacrifice it. Next, we're going to take out a Reassembling Skeleton for another one of these demons. I know, this seems weird since the skeleton is our best option to sacrifice with the demon, but we just can't really use the skeleton as much as I would like. Plus, it's a little slow. I haven't really talked about this yet, but if you haven't noticed, we're actually kind of converting this into a sort of aggro deck. All of our creatures have a lot more power than their mana cost, and this is just another example of that. So I just don't really want a 2 mana 1/1 in this specific build. Now you could probably build a Reassembling Skeleton deck with like, I forget the name of it. There's an enchantment, I'll put it on screen, that like says whenever a creature comes into play or dies or whatever, you get a 2/2 zombie, and you could kind of get some like recursive value with that. Also, I think there's one that puts out a bat token as well. Yeah, you could totally do that, but that's a completely different deck than what we're doing here. Also pretty janky, but you know, it's a thing. But for us, we're taking the skeleton out for the demon. I think it's better because it's 6 power for 4 mana. It's a good thing. Speaking of aggro, next we're going to take out 2 Lich's Caress and replace them with 2 Wanted Scoundrels. Lich's Caress is just way too expensive for a removal spell, and don't worry about it, we'll be putting some more removal in this deck later. But for now, the Wanted Scoundrels is just, it's really good. I feel like it's way underrated, but it's a 2 mana 4/3, which is kind of great, and the opponent does get a couple treasure tokens if they kill it, but having a creature that big that early, it feels really good a lot of the time. Though fair warning, red decks will almost always hit it with Lightning Strike. It's just, it always happens. So continuing with the Scoundrels, we're going to be taking out 2 Liliana Spoils for 2 more of them. 4 mana for a discard spell is just way too expensive. And while it's nice that we can dig through our deck for another card, I think having a 4/3 on turn 2 is just going to win us more games more often. So let's go with those. Next, we're going to take out all 3 Arisen Gorgons and replace them with 3 Graveyard Marshals. So the Gorgons are okay. They're 3 mana 3/3 that kind of have Death Touch, which is to say they have it only if we control Liliana. Otherwise, it's just a 3 mana 3/3. So we're going to be taking out the Gorgons for the Zombie Marshals instead. So they're 3 2s and they only cost 2 mana. So they're actually surprisingly aggressive. But they also give us a payoff for all the creatures we've been sacrificing to things like Demon of Catastrophes. We can pay 3 mana and start converting creatures in our graveyard into 2/2 zombies. And that's the type of thing that can actually turn the tide of battle, especially if the board gets locked up. It's just great value to just start pumping out tokens like that, and it's on top of an already aggressive creature, a 3 power creature for 2 mana. So all in all, it's pretty decent. Definitely better than the Gorgon, I think. Next, we're going to take out 2 Blood Divinations and replace them with 2 Sovereign's Bite. Blood Divination is actually really great value. We have to sacrifice a creature, but we get to draw 3 cards, which is a lot. But to be honest, our creatures are kind of good now, so I'm a lot less inclined to sacrifice them. Though, remember that deck I was talking about earlier with Reassembling Skeleton? This would actually be pretty good in that, you know, sacrifice Reassembling Skeleton, draw 3, then just recast the skeleton, no big deal. So yeah, there was kind of a split in which direction we could go, but I don't know. It's a little bit clunky and scary, and I don't like it. So we're just going to go with a more down-to-earth aggro build. Anyway, Sovereign's Bite lets us drain the opponent for 3. Now, remember, we're being very aggressive, so this is just going to give us some reach to finish off opponents or help us race other aggro decks. If we're just, you know, in a slugfest with a, you know, like a mono white aggro deck, being able to deal damage to them and also gain life is going to help us race them. Very useful. Next, we're going to take out these Strangling Spores for a murder. I mean, look, the spores cost 4 mana and they only kill a creature with 3 toughness or less. The murder costs 1 less mana and kills anything. I mean, literally anything, so long as it doesn't have indestructible, I guess. But man, nevertheless, this just seems way better. Why spend 1 extra mana to kill much smaller creatures when you can spend less mana and kill bigger stuff? Seems better, right? Makes sense? Yeah, I think so. Next, we're going to take out 2 Abnormal Endurance and replace them with Cast Downs. Now, before we look at these, let me just say that Cast Downs are a little bit pricey, and if you want to, you can just buy Murders instead. Cast Downs were F&M promos, so if you attend F&M, you might have 1 or 2 of them, so that's why I wanted to use them. But otherwise, if you want to save, I think they're like $1 each. So if you don't want to spend $1 each on Cast Downs, yeah, you can buy Murders. They will work fine. Anyway, the Abnormal Endurance doesn't do a ton for us. I mean, here's the thing. Here's what it's meant to do, but it's bad, you could target a creature with the endurance, then sacrifice it to Demon of Catastrophes so that you don't actually lose the creature, right? But here's the problem. You're still going down a card because you're losing the endurance, so that's still a card in the graveyard. Like, you still spent a card, and at that point, you're spending 6 mana to play the demon. It kind of defeats the purpose of having Demon of Catastrophes if you have to play it on turn 6 and you still go down a card anyway. So just having a clean way to kill a creature, I feel like that's going to be way more universally useful. So let's just go with that. And then finally, because these decks always have way too many lands, we're going to take out 2 of them for 2 Diagraph Ghouls. These are far from amazing, you know, just a 1 mana 2/2 that comes into play tapped, but the deck just has too many lands, so I really wanted to replace a couple of them with a 1-drop, and this is probably the best fit for our aggro plan. So yeah, I think it works fine. It's definitely better than, you know, just being flooded all the time, that's for sure. So I think this is fine. And yeah, those are our upgrades. If you want to spend a little bit more money on this deck, I think Spawn of Mayhem would be fantastic. It's a 4 mana 4/4 with flying and trample. It deals 1 damage to each player every single turn, and if you're low on life, it starts growing in power. It starts getting +1/+1 counters. And it has Spectacle, so you could possibly get this out on turn 3, which is pretty crazy. Fits with our aggro plan, kind of great, but the problem is, currently, at least at the time of this recording, they're about $10 each. So yeah, can't quite afford those. We need to spend about $40 on them. So not my favorite thing to do, spend $40 on 4 pieces of cardboard, but you know, hey, it's there, it's an option. If you want to spend a bit more money, I think these are pretty good in this deck. And you know, if you do happen to have them, if you open them, if you trade for them, whatever, and you want to sub them into the deck, the things you want to consider taking out are things like Gravewaker, Gravedigger, and Vampire Sovereigns. These are, in my opinion, the weakest cards in the deck at the moment. Gravewaker is just too expensive, and we're kind of emptying our graveyard with Graveyard Marshal, so the Gravedigger has the potential to just shoot blanks. Not super happy about that. And then Vampire Sovereign is fine, but it's just not as good as Spawn of Mayhem. Like, comparing them side by side, I'd rather have the demon than the vampire. So yeah, if you happen to open a Spawn of Mayhem, if you happen to trade for one, if you do just end up buying some of them, just any of these would be better if they are Spawn of Mayhem. You can kind of just take your pick, take any of these out for any number of Spawn of Mayhems, and that's like, the deck's gonna be better because of it. Anyway, that's it. That is all of our upgrades. We spent less than $10 on this thing, and while we won't be winning a Grand Prix with it anytime soon, there's no doubt that it is significantly better than what we started with. As always, you know, if you've been playing this straight out of the box, I mean, you're gonna win more games with this for sure. There's just a lot less crap in it and a lot more power. And yeah, if you want to see more Planeswalker decks like this, I have an entire playlist dedicated to them, and you will find a link to that in the description below, so check that out. Also consider checking out the channel if you're interested in budget-focused Magic the Gathering content. But in the meantime, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.